Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to talk about what I've recently read and what I'm currently reading. And I have been doing really well since the last time I've done one of these videos. I've completed quite a few books. I've completed 5 books total as of this morning, and I have a bunch more on the go. So let's just get into it. The first book I've completed is one that I've been working on for quite a while, and you've heard me talk about it multiple times, and that's Grant by Ron Chernow. This is a big presidential biography. It's over 960 pages long. That's not including the endnotes. And it is a thoroughly detailed depiction of Grant's entire lifetime, from his birth all the way through the presidency and up until his death. And it is excellent. Ron Chernow is a master at presidential biography, and I absolutely love learning more about Ulysses Grant. He is a larger-than-life character in American history, and this biography definitely explores his lionization and where he met those characteristics and where he fell down. He's a character or a person who had a lot of complexity, and Ron Chernow definitely details that all. It was a great book, and I very much enjoyed my time spent learning about Ulysses Grant. The next book I finished was one that I've also talked about multiple times on this channel, and it's a book that I buddy read with Doris over at Aldi Books. This is The Songs of Trees, Stories from Nature's Great Connectors by David George Haskell. This is a collection of essays that he wrote which explores the connections between trees and the natural world and the human world. And Haskell's premise is basically that humans cannot hold themselves separate from nature, that we are all, sorry about the glare on this library copy, that we are all connected in multiple ways, and it's not just through biology or things of that nature. It is also through social and just our connections to other forms of life. And I loved how he makes connections. He is, Haskell, in addition to being a biologist and a naturalist, is also a poet, and it shows very clearly in his prose. He is very lyrical. And while, as Doris said, some of these connections that he draws may be a little too science heavy for some of you at times, I think if you continue to read him, you will see how he brings everything together. It's just beautiful, and I, again, love this book. I will definitely be reading more David George Haskell as soon as he writes another book. The next thing I completed is one that you may have heard about over on Shawn, the Book Maniacs channel. It was a buddy read that I did with Shawn and Ange, and that is The Brontes Went to Woolworths by Rachel Ferguson. This was the book that I confused with Our Spoons Came from Woolworths. And you could see how I would mistake the two titles, with both having Woolworths in the title and both being from a similar time period in the early part of the 1900s. But the true book that we were buddy reading was The Brontes Went to Woolworths. And in this book, which takes place, I believe, in the, it was published in the 1930s, and it came in, I think it takes place maybe a little bit before that. We're following one family, a mom and her 3 daughters and their governess. So the 2 oldest daughters, Deirdre, who's the oldest, is a journalist, and her next youngest sister, who's also late teens, early 20s, is studying to be an actress. And then there's Sheil, the girl who's still in the schoolroom. She's probably like 8, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. And the girls and their mom have this extremely active, imaginary life. Basically, they've spun this fantastical world around themselves where they've taken, toys and also people that they've either seen on the stage or read about in the newspaper or just observed in the community, and spun out these fantasy worlds around these people where they're actually, interacting with their own family. And this very highly imagined world that they're living in brings them great comfort and joy, but it drives their governess absolutely frantic. It's a very madcap and absurdist novel, which I very much enjoyed. Evidently, the Brontes sisters had one of these very richly imagined worlds that they would each make up portions of, and they would play off of one another in much the same way that the women in this family do in the Brontes went to Woolworths. And so that's where the connection comes in. And I won't tell you any more about how that connection plays out. Shawn had a great review of this book on his channel, which I will link down below. Please go watch that. He is much more articulate about it than I am, and he loved it probably a bit more than I did. For me, it was a good read, but not a great read. I did not particularly love the way that it ended, whereas he did, but it did give me a lot of food for thought, and I very much enjoyed the very English humor of it, and I thought it was great fun. The next thing I completed was Parkland by Dave Cullen. This was the audiobook that I was listening to this week, and it is a nonfiction. Dave Cullen is the author of the nonfiction classic Columbine. And this book, I went into not really knowing anything about it. It was released, I think, in February. And in this book, Cullen outlines the year that he spent following the students from Margaret Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, which we all know as Parkland, because that was the town that this school's in. And it was the site of the horrific school shooting on Valentine's Day in a year ago so that would have been in 2018, right? Yeah, 2017. I can't remember, but I can't remember the exact date of year, but it was Valentine's Day. So he follows the survivors of that shooting, a group of survivors who formed the March for Our Lives group, which has been advocating for changes in our gun laws in the United States and arguing very articulately and well for changes, common sense changes that need to be made. These students have not been advocating for a repeal of the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights. They don't want to take everyone's guns away. What they want is common sense gun laws, closing gun show loopholes, beefing up background checks, dealing with a lot of things that many, many people in the United States all agree on in terms of common sense gun laws. And I found it absolutely fascinating. So Parkland is kind of different than Columbine. I went into it thinking it was going to be more of a Columbine type book where Cullen would talk about the school shooting and all of the ins and outs of that investigation and what happened on the day of the shooting and, the victims of the shooting and all that sort of thing like he did in Columbine. And this book only touches on the actual day of the shooting in a very brief way. He outlines the facts of it for sure, but then he really delves into the activism and the organization that these kids engaged in the year after the Parkland shooting. And it is truly amazing. I don't think I could have done what these kids have managed to do. And these are young kids that we're talking about. These are kids who, most of them were not 18 years old yet. And they organized, I think it's the third largest march on Washington in protest of, needed changes to our laws and our way of life, only behind the Women's March, and there was one other march. It was one of the civil rights marches. So, this was huge logistical things that they've pulled off, the messaging that they've accomplished, their savvy use of social media and press, the way that they protected themselves from the press. It's just truly outstanding what they've been able to do. And I would highly recommend anybody read Parkland if they are at all interested in what these kids from Parkland School have been up to and the March for Our Lives. And the other thing that I want to mention is I was particularly interested to hear how the Florida kids pulled in kids from other places in the United States, specifically the kids in Chicago, the Peace Warriors, and the Chicago Strong is the blanket group. And there's another group of kids in Chicago that have been advocating for, before Parkland even happened, advocating for changes to our legal system to help them deal with gun violence in their communities. And the way that the Parkland kids tried to integrate those already existing movements and to raise them up and to raise everybody's boats basically by shining the spotlight on the need for changes to gun legislation so that kids could be safe, whether it be in school, in their community, in their home, whatever. These kids are doing the work. I mean, they did not sit around and wait for the grown-ups to get their heads out of their butts and do something to protect them. They went ahead and organized themselves and said, you know, this is not right and we're dying and this is not acceptable. So, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now. I'm just so impressed by these kids and the work that they're doing to improve lives, their own lives and the lives of others is very, very inspiring. And then the last book that I finished in the last week or so is Fruit of the Drunken Tree by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. Sorry, my Spanish is not good. So this book is a fiction book that I picked up because it is on the BookTube prize list. It is currently still in the running in this quarterfinal round. And this book takes place in Colombia, in Bogota. And we're following a family who lives in a gated community. They are wealthy for their area. And there's young, I'll see if I'm so bad with names, so I'm going to have to look at the flap to find it. Chula and her oldest sister Cassandra, and then their mom are mostly on their own because the dad works for an oil company, and so he ships out for periods of time and then comes back. And so it's basically these three women alone, and Chula is like 7 or 8 in the start of the story. Cassandra is a few years older. The mom hires a young girl to be the maid, and the young girl, Petrona, I think that's how you say her name, Petrona, comes from a basically shanty town on the outskirts of Bogota, and she has a much different life. She had, she is very, comes from a very poverty-stricken area. Her older brothers have already gotten sucked into gangs and drug lord type activities, trying to earn some money for the family. And there's just danger all around her at all times, whether it be violence, sexual things. Petrona is really in a bad position. So she gets this job working as a maid for this family, and Chula is immediately fascinated by Petrona and wants to just know everything about her and to be her friend. And they sort of become intertwined. Petrona's life trying to avoid getting wrapped up in the violence that surrounds her community, and these two young girls trying to navigate life. And you're seeing everything from Chula's eyes. So all of the interactions between her mom and dad, which she doesn't fully understand, all of the political stuff that's going on in Colombia. This book is based on a little bit on the author's life. Contreras comes from Colombia, and this book is, you never really know, I don't think, the time period, but it's based on some true political events that happened with a big drug lord, what's his name, Pablo Escobar, is, sort of is a hero of the poor and of the downtrodden in Colombia, but he's also basically undermining the political system, which is corrupt. And so there's all these different groups, these violent groups. There's the paramilitary, there's the drug gangs, there's the government. Everybody's running around shooting each other, and nobody's safe. There's kidnappings happening all the time. And Chula is trying to, just grow up while all this is happening. And Petrona, who's only 13, has already been forced to grow up far beyond where she should have to be at age 13. And it's a good book. I had a hard time, not so much in that, it's not a difficult book to read. The story is good. It brings you along. The last third of the book is very, the pace picks up, and there's a lot of action happening, and the ending is very, very powerful. I didn't always feel emotionally connected to the characters, but I thought that the whole history and what I was learning about Colombia was super interesting the whole time. I just wonder if maybe if I just found it hard with the narrator being this young child. I just kept, the whole time reading thinking these young girls should not be having to deal with this. But maybe that's the point, is that, these young girls should not have to be dealing with all of this stuff all the time, and they are having to deal with all this stuff all the time. Now I know, things aren't so bad anymore in Colombia as they were back in the 90s and early 2000s. Things have gotten somewhat better, but they're still not great, and it just brings that home to you as, especially me having the privilege of being born in the United States and never having to deal with any of the stuff that they deal with. Their electricity doesn't stay on, their water gets shut off, even though Chula and Cassandra are living with their mom in basically the wealthy part of town. They still have to deal with deprivation and hardship and, going to school in the middle of all of that. And then, of course, the end, there's a lot of violence that happens, and the things that are done to these young girls are just horrific. And so that was hard to read and hard to think about, but I think it's a really important story, and we shouldn't turn away from these things that are happening in the world. So, yeah, I'm very thankful to the BookTube Prize for pushing me to read this book, which I probably never would have even heard of, let alone picked up, if not for that list. So that's what I've read so far in the last little while. And what I'm currently reading is a short story collection, You'll Think It, I'll Say It, by Curtis Sittenfeld. I don't think I've read any Curtis Sittenfeld. I do have one of her books on my TBR, which I have not picked up yet, American Wife, I think. But I had read that this short story collection was like, for people who liked American Housewife by Helen Ellis, which I loved because I loved the sarcasm, and like it was all based on female, or what I would say, modern women issues, and told in a very sarcastic, witty manner. So I loved American Housewife, and once I heard You Think It, I'll Say It was like American Housewife, I had to pick it up. I've read the first 3 stories in this book, and I am very much enjoying it. I think it is in the same vein as American Housewife, obviously a little bit different, but it reminds me, it's got the humor of American Housewife, but it's touching on a lot of subjects that modern women in America have faced, I will say it's awfully white. So just be aware of that. I'm also reading The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, which is my pick. I had picked it for the Irish Readathon. It's also on my classics list of the classic books that I'm trying to read. And I am on page 172. Dear Lord. And I'm in chapter 4 of this book, and it's a slog. I'm not gonna lie, it's a slog. I'm getting through it. I'm surprised in that it's not difficult to read, in that it's stream of consciousness, so I worried that I would find it difficult to read. I'm not finding it difficult to read, I'm just finding it boring. It's just not very interesting. I woke up this morning at 4, and I read chapter 3, trying to, get myself in a relaxed position to get back to sleep. And all of chapter 3 is basically a sermon about hell and sinning and brimstone and we're all going to hell kind of shit. Excuse my language. And it was just like, I don't know, ridiculous. I'm going to finish it because I'm determined at this point, and I'm over halfway through, so I'm not going to abandon it, but I'm not enjoying it. Let's be real. And I have also picked up and started These Truths, A History of the United States by Jill Lepore. I read Jill Lepore's book, The Secret History of Wonder Woman, and loved it. She is such an excellent historian and writes things in such a great accessible way about historical events and historical people. And this book basically is going to take us through everything from the founding of America, basically from Columbus all the way through present day. And clearly, we're not going to touch on everything because even though it's a chunker of a book, we just can't talk about everything, but it's going to talk about, I read the prologue, and it basically is going to focus mostly on politics and basically how America was organized around life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and equality, and all of our basic values supposedly in America, and whether or not we've lived up to our ideals as described in the Constitution. So very excited to continue on with that. The prologue and the first part of chapter 1 have already been awesome. And my current audiobook is #IMomSoHard by Kristin and Jen. I can't remember their last name. But if you, like me, love the I Mom So Hard videos on YouTube, all about two women who talk about mom stuff and how ridiculous it is to parent small humans, and all the things that women go through when they become wives and mothers, you would probably love this book. It is a collection of humorous essays written all about parenting and being a wife and being a woman in today's society. I am about 20% of the way through that audiobook and just finding it quite hilarious, and it has even brought tears to my eyes a couple of times with, truths that you will recognize if you are interested in that sort of thing. So that's where I am with my reading right now. I hope that you have all found some great books to read this week, and I'll talk to you later.